Hey, welcome back to the Awesome Life podcast. I'm Karen Stoltz, and I am thrilled to be here with the most amazing Faye Fulton. Faye is the CEO of a boutique consulting firm that specializes in business storytelling. How cool is that? She is sought after keynote speaker, and she delivers talks and workshops and inspires professionals to be better communicators, so that they can improve their companies, their products, and their services, and actually share what they have through the struggles that they might have had in building their companies by having a good story. Storytelling. Who would have thought storytelling in big business? Faye, thank you so much for joining us. Talk about a transition for you. This is amazing. So how did you get into storytelling for businesses? This is great.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you, Karen, for having me on your podcast. I'm delighted to be your guest.
Pleasure.
Well, I have always been very fortunate with my career. I have been in communication my whole career. But over the last 7 years, I have niched. So now I only deal with one type of communication, and that is business storytelling.
So unique.
Well, it's an incredible communication tool for many, many reasons. But I just kind of feel like I've come full circle because I was introduced to story at a very early age, and it's been a passion of mine my entire life. And now I get to work with story every day. But I had an incredible childhood. My father was a corporate bigwig, and he got a huge promotion. And before I was 6 years old, my family and we moved to Italy. So I grew up in Italy. And it was just an amazing, amazing childhood. I would not change my childhood with anyone else's. So in Italy, and of course the Italy back then was very, very different than the Italy of today. Back then there were very, very, very few Americans living in Italy. We were an enigma. So when I moved into the neighborhood, I was a huge tomboy. I was always outside, always interested in people. Everybody in the neighborhood knew me. I was the only American girl in the neighborhood. But in Europe, all major cities, most people live in high-rise apartment buildings, and we did too. So we were up on one of the top floors, and I became very close with a contessa. She was always out on her balcony, and she had heard there was an American girl that moved in, and she motioned me over one day and started talking to me from her balcony. But here's why I think my childhood was just so amazing. I actually grew up with two families. I had my American family, but then my other family was just one woman. It was the Contessa. And she was a retired opera singer, a famous European opera singer when I met her. And after she retired, she acquired that disease called agoraphobia, where you cannot leave your home. She couldn't go outside except on her balcony. So she never left her apartment except to go on her balcony. And that's actually how she got all of her things. She had a basket on a cord, and she would lower the basket down, and she would get her groceries, she would get her bread, she would get everything delivered to her with this basket system. But many Europeans do that. That wasn't unique to her, but she used it too.
So you couldn't go in, you couldn't deliver it to her door. She couldn't even open up her door. Can you tell our audience what agrophobia is? I mean,
yes, it's just the fear of going outside. Yeah. You have to stay in your home, your environment. Yeah. And she didn't have that until she retired. But anyway, so I had my two families, and I just did not get from my real family what I needed. Mm-hmm. And please don't get me wrong. I adore my parents. I love them. And, in my adult life, when I look back, they were doing the best they could. But what I mean is my American family, my parents were not touchy-feely. They never talked about feelings. And they never talked with me. They always talked at me.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
we're leaving tomorrow at 8, be ready. Have you done your homework? So I was a very curious child. I still am. I'd love to learn. I'm always curious. And when I asked a question, I wanted an answer. I really wanted to know. The answer I always got from my parents is because I said so. So it was just, I needed so much more. And that's why I feel so fortunate to have my other family, the Contessa. She's the woman who taught me about life. She taught me about music, about food, about architecture, about song, about fashion. She was amazing. And when I asked her a question, she would sit down beside me, and if it took an hour, she would take an hour to answer. She was just amazing.
So
So I don't know how, I'm sorry?
you were able to go in and be with her and really connect.
She took me under her wing. She never had children, but she treated me like I was her daughter. So
Oh.
we were an awkward pair. Here was this 70-year-old Italian famous singer and an American 6-year-old girl when we started out. You know? But that is what I needed to preface leading up to my love of storytelling.
Mm.
Because the Contessa had this disease, she wouldn't leave her apartment. All of her friends came to her. Well, her friends were famous performers too, you know, actors, singers, choreographers, and they came to her. So I was exposed to all of these people from all different countries, speaking all sorts of languages, all sorts of religions. It was fascinating.
Yeah.
And these people were incredible storytellers. I was just inundated with story at a very young age. So, you know, I couldn't have asked for anything better.
Oh, and in truth, when you think about it, what are the things that we remember? How do we remember these things? It's through story.
Well, that's one of the powerful reasons you want to use story. And there is a very specific reason for that. There are so many amazing reasons why story works.
Oh, tell us some.
But we remember stories because stories are actually co-created.
Mm.
So if I'm standing in front of you and I am telling you a story, for example, if I shared this with you, she put on her crimson red lipstick, stepped into her black stiletto heels, selected the perfect hat for the occasion, strapped the kids into the backseat of the car, and drove off toward downtown. Now, when I was sharing that, you weren't just sitting there listening because your mind was creating a picture of this woman for you.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And that's why people remember stories.
Yeah.
They're co-created. Your story will never match my story. I don't know what's going on in your mind. Now, the woman that you pictured in your head, what kind of hat was she wearing?
Yeah. Well, I could see it. It was a beige hat with a long feather in it.
Okay.
And in the black stiletto heels, all I could think of was, how does she walk in that?
That's not the kind of hat I was talking about in what I was sharing that with you.
No.
The kind of hat she had on was a Christmas hat.
Was it?
She was bringing her daughters downtown to see the Christmas decorations that evening.
Oh.
But you see what I'm saying? You had that image in your mind.
Yeah.
And that's why people can remember stories. It's how the mind works.
It's you were talking about going downtown for a Christmas show with her kids, and that brought to mind the hat my mom wore when she took me into Boston.
Okay.
To see things. So, you know, I have it now, and maybe that's why it's still there. It's a felt hat with a big feather in it, you know?
Oh, I love that. You still have it.
Anyway.
All right, now I want to be perfectly clear for you and all of your listeners.
Mm-hmm.
What I shared with you there is not story. That doesn't come anywhere close to being story.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it could become story, but it's going to take an awful lot of work. What I shared with you was simply a series of events, and that is not story.
Oh, of course. course. That's true. I hadn't
So
thought about that. Yeah.
this is one of the reasons I am so passionate about my work, because part of what I do is I have to educate people.
Yes.
People think they know story, and I understand that confusion, of course, but people think they know story because we're close to it. You know, when we were children, our parents read us a story every night before bed. So people think they understand story and they know it until they try to write one. And then they're completely overwhelmed. Well, whose voice do I need to tell this story in? What do I need? So it's not easy to come up with a good story.
Oh, for sure. There must be a number of little techniques and things that you have to keep on a lookout. Well, the events, for sure, the series of events. But what else?
Story, to be an actual story, it must contain certain components.
Yeah.
And as you know, my career is I'm a keynote speaker. So I speak in front of large groups of people at conferences, business meetings, and I only, as I shared with you, I only speak about business storytelling. So when I'm giving a keynote, I'll throw it out to the room. I'll say, can anyone give me the definition of story? And again, most people are just thoroughly confused, don't really understand it. So invariably, when I ask for the definition of a story, this is the answer I get. Story. Well, story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Well, yes, it does, but that doesn't give us any information about what a story actually is. Even a cockroach and Thanksgiving dinner has a beginning, a middle, and an end. But so most people can't even describe what story is, yet we feel like we know it.
Yeah.
So I have to, these days, it's very unfortunate. And I say unfortunate, what I mean is over the last 5 years, the words story and storytelling have become buzzwords in the business arena. So right now, everyone is talking about story, but people just do not get what a story is. They don't know how to use it. They don't get any impact. And it's because they're simply calling it story. It's not anywhere near story. I'm amazed at what people call story today. So I have to educate people. Story is not a list of bullet points. It's not your mission statement. It's not a series of events. So I have to have everybody start thinking about what story actually is. But I love doing that. I love seeing the light bulb go on. People are like, oh my God, well, you're right.
So tell us what are the components of a story?
I'd like to talk about why story is so important in business.
Right.
So if you're going to be competitive in today's business world, you need the skill of business storytelling, because storytelling is a communication tool.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the way to use it strategically in business.
Mm-hmm.
Now, going back to the buzzword thing, everyone's talking about storytelling. And the marketing industry has latched onto story as a selling tool.
Mm-hmm.
And that is not the way to use story. You want to use it as a communication tool. Who do we do business with today? Mm-hmm. People we know, like, and trust. Mm-hmm. Telling a business story is one of the fastest way to build trust. And it's just an amazing communication tool. Mm-hmm. But you have to know how to work with it. I love story. I've been working in story well before it was a buzzword for 30 years. And I'll be working in story way after it's no longer a buzzword. But I am a storyteller. So besides working with my clients and as a keynote speaker, talking about business storytelling, I write my own stories. Now that's a very different way to work with story, because that's when I stand up in front of an audience and I tell a story for sheer entertainment purposes.
Okay.
But I know what I'm doing with story. It's my area of expertise. This is how I can help. But I am currently the 2020, the Carl Sandburg Story Slam winner. And I am also, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Moth podcast. but the
Yeah.
moth is a really big deal.
Yes.
I am also the Moth Story Slam champion.
Fantastic.
So I love story. I know what I'm doing with story.
So,
But how I help in the business world is this is my skill set. And I can work with you because I always assume when a client comes to me, I also work as a business storytelling consultant one-on-one besides giving keynote speeches.
uh-huh.
And when a CEO or a power professional comes to me and says, well, I have to make this presentation and I need a story, I always assume that they are interested in an unforgettable story. And that's what they're going to have to bring to the table today, an unforgettable story.
Right.
Because there's a huge difference between a story, a good story, a great story, and an unforgettable story.
And they need to have that unforgettable story so people do remember them. If
Well,
you're talking about a one-on-one, for example, as opposed to a big business, yeah, they need to be able to tell a good story or communicate a good story. So what are some of the components that make it a good story?
well, we really don't have time for that in your
Oh,
podcast, but
we'll have to
that's
do it
okay, Karen. But
again.
here's what I'd like to share. That takes me quite some time to
Oh,
go
okay.
through all of that. But what I'd like to share with everyone, the 5 different types of stories
Oh, okay.
professionals need to be sharing in the business world today.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
So one of the types of stories is called the origin story.
Hmm.
And what I mean by the origin story is the origin of your business or your career. Why did you choose the industry or the field you're working inside of?
Mhm.
This is a way that people get to know you, get to understand where you're coming from. And you see what I'm meaning? Not to sell. This is a communication tool.
Right.
All right, another type of story is the beginning story. And what I mean by the beginning story is these are stories about your childhood.
Oh,
All of the life lessons you learned, which made you the person you are today while you were growing up. So what kind of person are you? Are you an honest person? Do you keep your word? Are you a person of integrity? You know, maybe a story that you share to communicate with your customers or potential clients or the people that are on your team is the type of person you are. You could share a story about you and your brother were playing baseball one day in the field and your brother hit a home run. Well, that baseball broke the neighbor's window and everyone else on the baseball field left, but you went to that neighbor's house and you're the one who said, we're so sorry. Could we get our baseball back? And we're the ones who broke it. I'm going to be happy to replace your window for you. You know, all of these life lessons,
yeah.
that's the character of the type of person you are. Very important to share.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, the third type of story is an inspiring story. And these are stories that a leader would tell, a story to rally your team around you. Because most people want to work with people that are like-minded and they want to be part of something bigger than themselves. They want to know that they're valued, that what they do contributes. So inspiring stories are, again, very important. The fourth type of story professionals need to be telling today are value stories. And these are stories that are going to convince your clients or your customers that they need what you offer. Do you offer a product? Do you offer a service? Now, again, I want to be very, very clear. The way to strategically work with story is not to sell. So what I'm sharing with you is these kind of value stories. These are not stories about how great your product is. You know,
Mhm.
our perfume is made with this, this, and this ingredients, and we only get it from France and Spain and Portugal. No, it's not about that. These are stories about people, about how your product has helped or improved the life of a person, how
Mhm.
your service has helped that person or improve their life.
Mhm.
All right, the fifth and the last kind of story that professionals need to be sharing today are customer stories.
Mhm.
And what I mean, again, something very clear. These are not stories that you're going to tell. And these are not testimonials. These are stories your clients tell, but not how great your product is, how your product changed that person's life or made it better. So there's a huge amount of information as to how to work with story to get the results that you expect and want to get, because it is certainly doable. But it's like anything else, you're going to have to learn this skill. And when people say to me, okay, story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Well, oh my gosh, how unsatisfying is that explanation? No, that's not it at all.
Now, let me ask you, do all companies need all of these stories?
If you're going to compete in today's world,
Mm-hmm.
you know, today, it's not about getting your message across. That's what most people say. I just want to get my message across. No, it's about getting your message understood.
Mm-hmm.
Just lobbing it over the fence isn't going to get you any results. You've got to be certain it's understood. Well, it will be understood if you wrap that message around a story, and you know how to do that.
Yep.
So, but the other thing is today, no one wants to be sold to.
Right.
We do business today based on relationships. So when you're working with business stories and you're sharing them, you're building those relationships with your potential customers and your clients. And that's what we have to do today to compete.
That makes sense. Now, let me ask you, when you are putting these stories together, and I can see all of these stories being very, very, very important in any kind of business, especially for an awesome life and the stories you tell. Would you separate these at different times, or would you kind of combine it all somehow into a big story?
No.
That makes sense? No.
If we tried to combine all of those into some kind of big, gigantic story, it would be nothing but confusing.
Okay. Good.
And it would be like trying to include everything but the kitchen sink.
Good.
It is just going to work against you every single time, because no person is going to be able to handle that much information.
Right.
So it wouldn't make sense to anyone. But no, there are specific times that you're going to need to use the different types of stories.
Okay.
So, but that's why I wanted to share all 5 of them with you, because you're going to need them and work with them strategically.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
are there any tips? I know we have a limited amount of time here, but are there any tips that that you'd be willing to share about how to make a good, any one of those 5 stories?
definitely. So I'd like to share this tip with all of your listeners. When people first start to work with me with story, they really have a hard time getting out of the gate. Most people will say, all right, my team told me I need a story. You know, maybe it's a CEO that I'm working with, and he's going to make a presentation to the investors. Well, that's a very important presentation. So his team has told him, you need a business story. And he has no idea about story. But again, that's why I love my career. That's where I can help. So most people will come to me and they'll say, story? I don't have any stories. I'm not interesting. I don't have any stories. Well, of course we all have stories. But it's one of the ways people get confused. Because to you, it wasn't a story, it was your life. You lived through it. So I have exercises that I go through with my clients to help them bring the stories to the forefront of their brain. We all have stories. Yeah. Now, there are plenty that aren't worth repeating. You know, you're not going to want to get up there and tell a story that will put your listeners to sleep. You know, I wouldn't allow that, of course, as the consultant. But there are plenty of stories that just bore people to death. Well, we're not going to go there. But I like to start out. A lot of CEOs also come to me with the opinion that story, I don't want to share a story. Story is nothing but fluff. I want to share my facts, my statistics, my dollar amount that we bring in every year. Well, I have to educate them. And I always tell them, well, in fact, story is much more important than your data, because data can only be understood in context. Your story is the context. And if you don't bring that to your listeners, no one's going to understand your data. So the light bulb starts to go off immediately with these people that think story is nothing but fluff. Oh, let me show you and tell you why it is not. First of all, you're dealing with human beings. And one of the key components of story is emotion. If you do not include emotion, you do not actually have a story. But here's another way people are totally abusing story. When they hear the word emotion, they go completely overboard. So in a business meeting, I have witnessed this many, many, many times. They hear the word emotion, they write their story, and then they get up and tell it, and their story is about the time they were raped when they were on a college campus, or about their mother committing suicide. That is way overboard. You never want to do that in business. That is sharing way, way too much, and it's not even appropriate in a business arena. That's not what we mean by emotion. But again, Karen, you're shaking your head. People are just so confused about what story is.
Yeah. Yeah, as you were saying that, people were popping into my head. That's the first thing that they talk about. Yep. And, you might be able to relate to that, and that's awesome if that's what you're doing, but that's not for a big business. For a business that's moving forward.
No, that's just completely too personal in the business arena, something like that.
Yep.
But also you stand a big chance of that potential client or customer thinking you are way too damaged. I don't want to deal with someone who has that kind of history. That is not the kind of emotion we're talking about.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And as you bring it to my attention, the difference between what's going on, I remember one of my mentors he eventually became, but when I saw him, I thought, boy, is he full of bull hockey. and he is just talking through, and I can still see it today. This is probably 15 years ago. I can see it today. And I'm sitting back in my seat saying, yeah, and then he started talking, and I started going forward, and I started, oh my gosh, it all makes sense now. My whole world has shifted into my way of thinking. And he became my mentor. I couldn't get enough of him. So
wow,
he's a leadership coach for Fortune 500 companies. And this is how he did it. And so I teach his leadership style.
Wonderful.
Yeah, but the story that you're talking about, and as you're explaining it a little bit more, I'm still seeing in my mind's eye that he had his video up there, but it was more the emotion that he was putting out there, not sharing anything but story, what my dog taught me. Run a business.
Oh yes. And that's the appropriate type of emotion. It's just one emotion, because the emotion he was talking about was love. That dog gave unconditional love.
Yeah.
And that's appropriate.
Of your employees, support, always lead with questions, kindness. Yeah. So anyway.
Well, you were asking me for a tip. So what I'd like to share with your listeners is this. What you want to do when you're responsible for business storytelling is to work on your writing skills. You will have to be using precise language, wonderful phrasing, because again, you want to create an unforgettable story. And most people's writing skills are not very strong. So that is a skill you will definitely need to bring to the table.
And do you with that?
When people give me the definition, story has a beginning, a middle, and end. Well, here is the definition I share when it comes to business storytelling. So I'd like to give that to your listeners today too.
Yeah, I'd love that.
So storytelling is the intersection of your writing skills and your telling skills. Both skills are essential, but the magic happens when you are an expert at combining those skills. You're going to have a lot of skills to be a great storyteller. And telling a good story will never make up for a poorly crafted story. It's not going to happen. But that's another reason I love what I do. You're going to need to be very good in many different areas. It's not simple, but it's so powerful.
That is amazing. You know, really, you have, it's a light bulb going off, as you said. It's, yeah, I can see a lot of difference now. How important those things, obviously, companies had hired people like yourself, maybe even you, to help them create these stories, the stories with the emotion. I'm thinking immediately of the Budweiser commercials, you know?
Yes.
Those are all very emotional, and it's a know, like, and trust. Well, I don't care for beer, but by golly, I love what their values are.
Now, and the reason you remember that, and most sports fans love the Budweiser commercials because they are actually story.
Yeah.
The other commercials you see are not story.
Exactly.
That's one of the reasons you're remembering them. It has all the components of story, and it actually is a story.
It is
hard to do because I think their commercials are a minute and a half long. That is really a challenge.
It's usually 30 seconds, but
yeah, it's really.
Yeah. So the fact, what you are saying is exactly the difference. Oftentimes I sit down and become quite analytical. What is the difference between this story and this story? Well, as you say, this was not a story. The other one was, and it was telling us your values. It's telling us what's inspiring, what's hopeful, what kind of company you are. I will look at your company more closely.
Well, again, because now that I understand what type of person you are, I want to do business with you. I'm going to be able to trust you. I know you're going to deliver. It's building those relationships. It's not trying to sell. But that's what everybody is out there trying to do with story. Well, you're not going to get the results you want because you don't know how to work with story strategically.
I love that.
And of course, this is just the tip of the iceberg. That's all we can do on your podcast.
No, it's just the beginning here. I just want to learn from you so much more, Faye. This is wonderful. So
and I just adore that.
How can people get in touch with you?
Well, people can certainly find me out there. They can go to my website, which is fayefulton.com, simply my name. They can find me on LinkedIn. I also am on Instagram, and on Instagram, I'm Faye Fulton _speaker. And if you're following me on Instagram, I post every day, but I'll share that here is another tip that storytellers will have to bring to the table. If you're going to be an excellent storyteller, you're going to have a vivid vocabulary. Vivid. Now, most people don't even have a strong vocabulary, but storytellers need a vivid vocabulary. So here's what I'd like to share. If you follow me on Instagram, every Tuesday, that's one of the things I share. And what I'm telling you is I'm going to share my definition of the word. And that's a storytelling technique. So sometimes when you're telling a story, you use the word. But another great technique is instead of using the word, you share your definition of the word.
Oh.
So on Tuesdays, I share vocabulary with my definition of it. So I will share that with your listeners also.
That's wonderful. That is awesome. One of the things I find very important is without knowing what the definition is, I might have a very different definition of a word than you do. So again, back to this leadership coach. He said, I love you. I love you all. And I said, bull hockey, you don't even know who I am. I am one of 350 people out here in the audience. And then he said, my definition of love.
So you've already seen that technique in action.
It is.
And it changed everything, didn't it, Karen?
Now I can honestly say, I love you. Yeah.
There you go. There
Yeah.
you go. It's a great storytelling technique.
It's all about the definition. So that is wonderful. So that's every Tuesday.
Yes, on Tuesdays.
And that's Faye Fulton _speaker.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. We'll get that out there. And any last tips that you would like to share, or any message or anything? Or you've told us so much, so I understand maybe.
As far as an awesome life, my journey has been incredible. As far as an awesome life, I've almost lost my life 12 times in very, very different ways. And I always call that being slapped to the ground, because that's how it makes me feel, just being slapped to the ground. So my advice is to always pick yourself up and go forward. Now, sometimes it takes a lot longer to get back up, but don't stay down. Get back up. There is so much more coming your way. I don't care what your age is. That's just a number. There's so much more. Get back out there. That's what I would share with every person.
That's wonderful. And getting back to what you do, having all of those experiences, being able to create more story. And learning from the story.
Yes.
When you are knocked down, get back up, keep moving and learn from it, because it is all part of your story.
And there's always a lesson.
Yeah,
Always.
Yeah. Always. Well, who was it? Zig Ziglar, who always said, look for the good. No matter how bad it is, look for the good, because there is always a lesson. And as long as you're learning, you're still alive.
And awesome. It might take you a while to realize what the lesson was, but there's value in that too.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Faye, thank you so much. FayeFulton.com. I can't tell you how thrilled I am that you joined me today. And I look forward to learning more story from you.
Karen, you're so dear. Thank you for saying that. I've truly enjoyed talking to you. You're just an amazing woman. So thank you.
Thank you. It's been a total pleasure. Until next time.
Okay, sounds good. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Faye.
You are so welcome. I enjoyed it.
You are awesome.
I love the look on your face, because I could tell you were really starting to think about story. And you were like, all of my clients that I work with one-on-one, they're like, oh, yeah.
Yeah. So I was writing down here the different things. I'll put it in a little bit in the write-up about our talk. But
sure. Sure.
Oh, yeah, I get it. And trying to relate it and so on. And yeah, that's exactly what they were doing. That is so cool. And using NLP along the way a little bit, I'm sure, in the stories, but Neurolinguistic programming.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the amazing things to me over the last 10 years. The neuroscience has proven so much. The mind actually thinks in story form. That's how powerful storytelling is. So there are all these neurological reasons to work with story in business. And, this is all information I share. And it's amazing once people start to truly understand it.
And if you think about it and you are aware and you are honest with yourself, it isn't all of, as you say, the data out there. That can, unless you are a math whiz or something, who's going to remember that? But if you say this story of this occurred because of that, and this data has helped prove that this has helped that person or that company or that business grow whatever the word is.
Exponentially.
Thank you so much.
There's your vocabulary. No, that might be pronunciation. I remember I taught my 7-year-old nephew the word indubitably.
Oh, I love that.
And it took him about 2 weeks, but he learned how to pronounce that word. And one day in class, he used that word and impressed the heck out of his teacher. Because that was his answer. She asked him a question. He said, indubitably. Sorry, I just thought of that.
I love that. I love that. And the thing that saddens me, because those are all words that came easily out of my mouth in the year when I was growing up, and never thought twice about it. However, in toning down to America now, it's like, do I really have to speak on a second grade level? I don't. Not. It just kills me. It kills me.
Me too. But language is something else I just love. I speak 3 languages. I love language. So it's part of what I can bring to the table. But the other thing that happens in this country is words become so overused, they have no meaning anymore.
Yeah.
And here's one of those words today, awesome. Yeah. It doesn't mean awesome anymore. It is completely overused. In fact, it has no meaning. Well, people just used it because they don't have a strong vocabulary.
Yeah. And I use it because I really feel it. Period.
It does have a meaning, doesn't it? Yeah.
Say what you mean and mean what you say. And even though it is overused in the general populace, you have to look at who is saying it.
Oh my gosh.
And
it's just,
for me, like one of my clients said, Karen, you know, you're saying awesome, and I hear it 100 gazillion times a day, and it has no meaning. But when you say it, I know you mean it.
Well, that's completely different. Yeah.
I know you mean it. So.
Well, I just looked at the clock, and I'm going to have to go, Karen, but yeah. I so enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
My lady, and thank you so much. I will be back in contact with you soon. All right.
Terrific.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.